Good afternoon. I'm Tacey Goheen, the Director of Community Services. Welcome to our June Healthy Dynamics program. We're so glad that you are with us today to meet some of our new residents and one of our new staff members. So the folks that we have with us today are artist Avery, who lives in Building 5, Mary Lou Price, who is in apartment building 4, Harry McDowell building, Mary Wells, who is also in apartment building 5, the Trinity building, Bliss Wheeler, who is in apartment building 4, and then Ariel Wingfield, who is our resident services assistant. So we just welcome all of our guests today. So glad to have them with us and hope you enjoy.
Well, I'm artist Avery, and I live here in Building 5, and I thought I would talk a little bit about places I have lived, because that sort of became part of who I am. I've never lived in any place that is particularly unusual. It's always been in the continental United States, and it's never been a big known city. But I was born in Kansas, right in the middle of the Great Depression and the horrible Dust Bowl that was so damaging to that part of this country. And I don't remember living in Kansas, but my parents, like their generation and the Grapes of Wrath that moved west, my parents moved east to New York State. However, I spent every summer in Kansas with both of my grandparents. My grandparents on both sides were the first very early settlers of Kansas and Missouri, rode west with the wagon trains and so on. And what I remember, one event I remember, was sitting on my great-grandmother's lap, who lived into her late 90s, and she was telling me stories about the early days of Kansas. And one of the stories she told was about Buffalo Bill. And Buffalo Bill, when he would ride around the west to get the men to ride with him to kill the buffalo, he would stop in Republic, Kansas, and he would stay with my great-grandparents because he was quite fond of my great-grandfather, who evidently rode with him. My great-grandmother had an entirely different take on Buffalo Bill. She thought he was the most disgusting man she ever knew. So that's what I remember. I also remember amber waves of grain, which is in America the Beautiful, because often I would be there at harvest time. And in the wheat fields with my grandfather. When my parents moved to New York State, they moved to what's called the Western Tier, which is south of Buffalo and Rochester, not far from the Great Lakes, and 40 minutes from the Finger Lakes in the foothills of the Allegheny Mountains. So that was a very beautiful part of this country to live in. And I think if there were such a thing as nature girl, that's what I was at that time. I grew up playing in the woods, playing in the creek, embarrassing my mother by bringing home a turtle in the middle of her bridge party, and so on. But eventually I went to college in Pennsylvania and met my future husband there, and that, of course, had a big influence on who I am. When we graduated from college, he left and went to Rochester, New York, to seminary, and I left and went to Newark, Delaware, to work as a biochemist for DuPont. I was to continue in the various places we lived working as a biochemist. I worked for DuPont, Upjohn, and Park Davis. I used to say, well, I still say this, I couldn't hold a job, but actually what I was doing was following my husband around the country. We moved to Schenectady, New York, and our 2 children were born in Niskayuna, New York. And after being there for 3 years, we moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan. Now, I tell you that because after we moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan, I got a letter from my college roommate who said in her letter, "Is there any hope that someday in the future you will move to a town that has a name that I can spell?" But we lived in Kalamazoo, and then, once again, my husband changed his mind, which I knew before he knew he was going to do this. He decided that he would prefer to teach Victorian English. So he went back to graduate school. We moved to Ann Arbor, and after 3 years, we finally settled. And of course, that's when we moved to Columbia, South Carolina in 1971, which is a terrible time to move children. One was entering 5th grade, one was entering middle school. They did not want to come to the South and leave all their friends and so on. So we told them this will be a great adventure, and we built it up. And unfortunately, we taught them how to sing Roll On, Columbia, Roll On, which they sang in the back seat all the way here on that long trip from Ann Arbor to here. When we arrived in the middle of August, it was hot, miserable, not a time you introduce children for the first time to their new home. But then eventually, after 9 months, spring came, and spring was glorious. None of us had ever seen spring in the South. And so that was a real boost, particularly to me, because I like to garden. And so at that point, we knew we had settled in the place that we would be. As time went by, and when we first got here, there was nothing for me to do as a biochemist working in pharmaceuticals. So I thought, well, I'll go to the University of South Carolina. Perhaps they can do something with me. And I went there, and I did get a job in research, which I will not tell you what I did because it unnerves some people when they find out what I did and how much I learned about this state by doing it. But if you want to ask me sometime, I'll tell you. The second job was going to the Baruch Institute, which is the marine science program at the university, and I managed the field lab in Georgetown, South Carolina, which was interesting. I did that for several years, and I thought, well, if I've got to do this, I better be a marine scientist. So I went back and became a marine scientist. But eventually, I was moved into the administration. And overall, I worked at the university for 26 years. And I became the vice president for research for the university system. And then eventually, I retired. When people get to know each other, they talk about their hobbies. I think it's quite obvious my hobby was gardening. Another hobby, I read. I love to read. I can get addictive about it. But I realized that my main hobby was travel. And I have been fortunate enough to have traveled to all 50 states, to all 7 continents, and to over 70 countries around the world. Well, I went to England many times, and I very much liked England, but I went there with my husband because he often took his class from Columbia College to England. I think I like countries that are very different from what I know here because I love to learn new cultures and so on. Of course, Africa, being a young woods girl and in the woods, I really liked Africa. I've been there a couple of times. I took a trip to Central Asia about 8 years ago maybe that was very rigorous, and Tajikistan, the 5 stands as they call them. And I found that very interesting. I also, and the third one, I've been to Russia 3 times. And once I had to go there on business to negotiate a contract for the University of South Carolina. And I went to Siberia. It was about Lake Baikal. And I did that all alone, and it was still the Soviet Union at that time. That was an interesting challenge. I learned a lot from that. So I would say those 3 are maybe some, and Easter Island, I would say are my memorable trips. I can't travel like that anymore, so now I read my travel journals. I think you've heard more than you want to hear.
Hello, I'm Mary Lou Price, and I moved into Still Hopes in February the 20th, 2020. That was 2020. I'm very happy here, and I'm from Columbia. I decided to take my 80 plus years and kind of divide them into quarters about my life, and which isn't very exciting, but you just have to put up with it. My first 20 years were spent with a loving family. I feel like I was very privileged and very fortunate to have parents and brothers that were so wonderful to me. I was able to attend private school my whole life, and so were my brothers. My father was a textile executive in New York City, and my mother was a housewife. I was born in New London, Connecticut, and raised in Greenwich, Connecticut, and very happy life. I had two brothers that were older than I was, that would torture me by throwing fire bombs into my metal trash cans to wake me up in the morning. That's probably why I can't hear right now. My older brother was a student at Yale and turned out to be a publisher and a writer, and he in fact did the book Jaws, and he led a very exciting life in the city with his wife and two children. My younger brother, which was still older than I was, went to Yale also, went on to get a Fulbright scholarship to University of Glasgow, and came back from there to be an Episcopal priest. Both of them have passed away now, and I miss them so much. You just can't, when the memories you have as a child, and it was always so wonderful after my parents passed away to be able to call my brothers and say, do you remember the name of the street? And now I can't do that. But I remember happy times in Greenwich, and I remember croquet tournaments every summer night, and it was just very, very combative, but very much fun. My second 20 years, which would have put it 20 to 40, was really spent in my schooling. I went to St. Anne's School in Charlotte, Virginia, and then I went on to Hollins College. That was in Roanoke, and that's where I met my husband. And we eventually got married and had, at that time, 2 children, and moved to Raleigh, and then moved to Charlotte, and he was in the insurance business. And then we moved to Columbia, where I didn't even know where South Carolina was. I knew it was south of North Carolina, but I really didn't. Now I've been here almost 60 years, and I love it completely. Two of our children, their older child, they attended public schools, have graduated from the University of South Carolina. They have, my older son has a son that just graduated from the University of South Carolina in the wonderful year of 2020. And my other son has 4 children, and 2 of which just graduated in the same year. It's been a funny year. And still has 1 in college. Very sweet, wonderful daughter-in-laws. Then after still in this segment, another little baby popped up, and his name is Tommy, and he's my youngest son, and he is a very personable, loving child. He is married and sadly divorced, but has 2 beautiful children, and a girl and a boy. So I just worked, and as a matter of fact, one of my friends called me one day and said, "Would you like to own a yarn shop with me?" And I said, "Well, I don't have anything else to do." I mean, the children were in school, and so we started the Friendly Yarn Shop in Columbia and did that for years. And we didn't make any money. We did our own hours. We'd close at 3. We'd get there at 10. But we had a wonderful little, as you know, if you know yarn shops, are just a little cult that everyone sat around and knitted and crocheted and tatted and did all kind of thing. It was very, much fun. But it came to my husband's attention that maybe I needed to make some money. So I took a job with Nationwide Insurance as a lobbyist and a manager of that department. And leading up to that, I went to. Most people go to the. They go from the state to the private industry. I went from the private industry to the state, but I worked there for 30 years, and I worked for in the Senate, and I worked for some wonderful, wonderful senators, and they gave me the knowledge to see what really politics is. And I want to say, in those days, politics was much different than it is now. I will say one thing about it that I remember was I was banking and insurance, and I had 2 study committees, and we were studying the automobile insurance crisis, and at that time it really was. And we would go and study it in other states and everything, and then we came out, and it was very, very tense when we were fighting it on the floor. And the senator came up to me just after we adjourned one evening and said, Ms. Price, I need for you to answer me the question. And he asked me the question, which I had no idea. And I said, Senator, I'm so full of details right now. I'm going to have to spend the evening deleting some of these details, and I'll have your answer in the morning. So the next morning he came in, and I went, Senator, I've got your answer, and to your question, and he said, what question? So anyway, I retired from there, and it's been, my husband passed away, became very sick, and I retired, and I took up pottery, the clay works, and I have been doing that now for 10, 11 years, although it's closed right now because of the virus. But I love it. I'm not good. I'm kind of folksy art, but every once in a while I'll go to a festival and sell my wares, and it was exciting. And I'm looking forward to, my intention when I came here was to have maybe 2 hours a week or 4 hours a week to go down there to the studio in downtown and do some work and do that. And I hope that we'll be opening in hopefully a couple of weeks. And I hope to make some things for the holiday show here. So and I think that's about all that I can babble away. I could babble forever, but...
I have lived in Columbia for close to 60 years. When I came to Killingsworth the other month, I had been in my same house for 57 years. So you can imagine the junk I had, but I'm happy to be here. My hobbies are Carolina sports and bridge. I'm in 3 bridge clubs. 2 of them meet every other week, and 1 of them meets once a month. And then we have season tickets to football, baseball, girls and boys basketball, girls softball, and I've enjoyed all the sports things. My husband was a coach, and so we didn't know anything else and everything. And all of our time was spent there between home and church and sports. That was what we had. He was a PE teacher, so therefore, and he was the boys' PE teacher, so we coached all the boys' sport. He went from there to drill, and from drill to Flora, and from Flora he went to the Department of Youth Services, and that was his last 15 years was there, and he coached everything there. I mean, they just had one person who did the sports, and they were so confined, but that's where his last years were. So we were both state retirees, and enjoyed the state of South Carolina, I'll say that. Killingsworth has always meant a lot to me because I am Methodist, and we do a lot for Killingsworth, and we've visited, and so it wasn't new. I also am retired from alcohol and drug abuse in South Carolina, And Killingsworth was a very good friend of us in placing our females. Finding a place for females to go was very difficult. And needless to say, when they were sober, they were very picky about where they wanted to go so they would not be exposed to the alcohol and drugs again. And Killingsworth certainly came along for us. I have lived in Columbia, like I say, for many, many years. Both of my girls were reared here. I have 2 daughters, 2 wonderful son-in-laws, since I never had a son. They are just wonderful. And 2 grandchildren. My oldest grandchild is a boy. After rearing 2 girls, we just saw it as heaven. He's an adopted child and is now 21. And then I have a granddaughter who just finished high school who's going to the University of Tennessee, which broke all family rules, but that's okay. I love sports. I love South Carolina. But I want to tell you about how I know Killingsworth and what it means to me. Along my journey, we lived on the campus of Epworth Children's Home. Needless to say, I got a lot of teenagers into trouble, and where they were confined to their home and their little property area because they would slip off and come to our apartment to babysit. They'd have to come and say, "Can we please take Pam in the yard, you know?" And I would let them, which was wrong, I know. But they didn't have babies then and everything. But that was a wonderful experience. And then when I went to work and got familiar with Killingsworth, I just felt like I was kind of going in a circle from the young to the older, and I've enjoyed that too. Like I say, I'm retired from mental health. I've been retired almost as long as I've worked. I had 30 years there, and I've been retired 22, so I've almost completed another circle. Both of my children are in the area. They chose to go to Lexington to live instead of Columbia. But my oldest daughter is now retired from Palmetto Richland. Prisma. But she's been working there during all this thing. She's a pharmacist. And then my other daughter works for attorneys here in town. I have 2 wonderful son-in-laws. I don't believe I could have reared boys as well as their mothers did. But the girls are fine, and I have 2 grandchildren. Epworth was wonderful, have fond memories, and Killingsworth has been wonderful. And as far as I can tell, this is a needed facility, and it brings such harmony back in their lives, where they feel like that they can now live with other people and not use drugs or alcohol. It gives them a foundation to go out and find their own home and things like that. So I just want to say thank you, Killingsworth, for what you meant to Morris Village. That was the department I worked for under mental health, and you certainly were good to us. Needless to say, I've had an interesting life. I've enjoyed every minute of it. I've gone from mental health to alcohol and drug to children's home, you know. So I've had a real wide, varied life.
Well, hi folks. I'm Bliss Wheeler. I moved to Still Hopes recently and live in McDowell, 4110. I was born and raised in Scottsville, Virginia. Just a hop, skip, and a jump down the road past Monticello, where Mr. Jefferson had his home. I was one of 3 children, and I've been a volunteer most all of my life. But it started when I was in the 1st grade. In this small town, we just had one school for the one little building for the 1st and 2nd grade, 1 class of each, and then about a block down the street was the 3rd grade through high school. Well, my mother was not happy with the way they kept the bathrooms in this little primary school up at the top of the hill. And she spoke to the principal, and he was going to talk to the janitor, and the janitor didn't listen or didn't do anything to suit my mother. So she would come down to the school a couple of days a week, and after school was out, she would clean the bathrooms. Well, because I didn't want to walk home by myself when I could wait a minute and ride along with my mama, I helped her. And then we had such fun when we finished that. We went to the boys' bathroom and we danced. And we had fun. You know how girls back in the 40s were not allowed to go in boys' bathrooms, but we did, my mom and I. I finished high school there and went to James Madison College, which was just coming out of its state teachers college phase. It's now James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, one of the most beautiful parts of our country. That Shenandoah Valley really, truly is delightful. While there, I became involved in the yearbook production, and my junior year, end of my sophomore year, I was elected to be the business manager of the yearbook my junior year, and then at the end of that year, I was elected editor of the School Marm. Well, being a business major and not a teaching major, more and more people not majoring in education, I thought School Marm was a little outdated, so I started this campaign among students, talked to the faculty at their faculty club meetings and the president of the school, and we ended up agreeing that it was appropriate to change the name. And so I had a contest where people could submit suggestions, and then we had a vote on 2 or 3 of them, and we chose the Bluestone as the name of the yearbook. And as far as I know, it still has that name. And Bluestone, you say, well, what is that? Well, that's the material that the buildings of the college, university, were built from. They kind of turn gray after a few years, but they start off with a very blue tone in the stone of the buildings. After I graduated from college, I went to work at Tennessee Eastman Company, way, way down Route 11 into East Tennessee. It was a great place to work. It was a big company. It was a division of Kodak, Eastman Kodak, and they made chemicals and polymers and that kind of stuff. But they brought in, for a town of 30,000, I would think the percentage of college-educated and a lot of PhDs that they hired to work in the chemical area, the research area. But all girls, regardless of education, either went into the stenographic pool and then later became assistants or secretaries. Or if you were a chemistry major, you'd go to work in the research department as a technical editor, not using your chemistry background particularly. But that was the way it was in the time. But it was in this lovely town that I met Harry Scrivener, who had grown up in Atlanta, and his father was with the telephone company, and he was transferred to Columbia, South Carolina. They lived up on Saluda Hill during his middle school and high school years, and so he got to know a lot of folks. We had 2 wonderful children, a son, and then 16 months later, a daughter. Bo was named for his father, Harry, but we didn't want Big Harry and Little Harry around, so we nicknamed him Bo, and Bo Scrivener goes well together, and Francis Scrivener does too, so those are good names. Harry was transferred to Carolina Eastman, and we moved here in 1975, lived out in the Irmo St. Andrews area before Harbison Boulevard existed. It was planned, but not existed. And being a stay-at-home mom, I transferred into the junior league in Columbia. Got to know my way around there. Ended up being a docent at the zoo for several years. Loved that. And then I went to work part-time and worked at the Student Loan Corporation, making college loans to college students. And then I not transferred, but I moved to the financial aid office at USC. Talk about a job. Oh, I think, most days you would see 10 to 20 students trying to help them with their problems. And I only met 2 in my whole 8 years there that I did not want to adopt and take home with me. They were so nice, and so many of them were so needy, having lost parents or whatever. Then my husband took a day off work to do an engineer's project around our house. And I did go to work. And when I got home that night, there were no lights on in the house, except the kitchen light that I turned on that morning downstairs. So I just started kind of freaking out and went in. No, nothing had happened in the garage. That was what he was going to do, this project. And so I went flying up the steps, and he had evidently had a stroke that morning. And I could see a left brain stroke affects your right side, but I could see he had his knee up, left knee, and his hand was rubbing it. So I knew he was not deceased, but unfortunately that stroke expanded, and he died the next day. Well, he was 56 years old, and I was a couple of years younger. That was no fun. Both children were married. I think it was May, late April, May, that my daughter told me, "Mommy, my test came back positive. We're going to have a baby." What joy that was. It was the first joy since walking in and finding my husband with the stroke. Well, the baby was born in January. It was a little girl named Hannah Elizabeth. And of course, the grandmother has to take a week off from work and go be with the daughter, helping her bring that baby home from the hospital and be there to help with things for that first week. Well, when I got back to work, after a while, the people in the office were saying, "Well, how is my Hannah?" I had been saying my granddaughter Hannah, but I'd just been saying my Hannah, and they thought that was her name. So today, my Hannah and I still call each other my Hannah. She calls me Omi, and she signs things, my Hannah. Several years after my husband died, I went to our church's Christmas party at a family's home. Member of the church. I went to St. Mary's Episcopal out in the Irma, St. Andrews area. And then I found myself, there was only one other person there who was not with a spouse, and that was Bliss Wheeler, whom I knew from church. Not well, but we found ourselves both tall and talking easily with one another. Early the next year, it was December at the Christmas party that I talked with Hoyt. He asked me to marry him, and I said, yes! I couldn't believe it. But we had a very good marriage. We had planned still. We had put a deposit down on Well Point, to be finished next year sometime, but had talked a number of times and made the final decision in June when we were coming home from yet another vacation trip, that as soon as he got his things caught up in his office at home and I got things kind of settled, that we would come over and talk to Stuart Rawson about moving sooner. So that was the plan. We really both wanted to do that. And then we'd get busy on the house. But he passed away So here I am, following the plan. I love being here, and I'm so happy to be part of Still Hope Strong.
I'm Ariel Wingfield. I'm the Resident Services Assistant. I've been here since January, so 6 months now. I moved back to South Carolina in November of last year. I graduated from Greenville, so I've been in South Carolina before, like 3 hours away. I moved to Arkansas after graduation to be closer with my grandparents and my brother. Other family lives there too. When I was in Arkansas, I had a daughter. She's 2.5 now. Her name's Autumn. We moved back here to be closer with my dad, who's Troy Wingfield, the Director of Facilities. We're looking for houses. We're trying to buy a home in Lexington. So we just got pre-approved for that, and we're just looking for a house. I love working here at Still Hopes. Before here, I worked at a bank. It was a very small town bank, same people all the time, kind of like here, sitting at a desk, talking with the same people every day. When I'm not here, it's kind of hard to have any extracurriculars when you have a toddler. So me and her go fishing sometimes. We try to go hiking. We take a lot of walks around my neighborhood. We're working on going to different state parks. We're going to start doing that just to go outside. With coronavirus, kind of hard to do anything right now. And when she's asleep, that gives me a chance to clean, because you don't really get to clean when the toddler's awake. So we're cleaning and packing, getting ready to move. We don't have any animals, so I can't really play with the animals. So I want a dog. I really want a dog, but I'm not ready to have a dog yet. Once we buy our new house and get settled in and get a fence put in, then we'll get a dog and let her pick out her little puppy, because she's weird about dogs. So she'll get to pick her out. The hardest part about balancing work and parenthood is lately with the virus, I've been having to stay late or come in early. And so that kind of throws off Autumn's schedule. She's very schedule oriented. And so it changes things a little bit. But since our neighbor babysits, my dad's able to just pick Autumn up from the babysitter. And so that's helped. But at least I have my weekends. My weekends is what makes the balance work. Me and Autumn find something to do outside. If she's taking a nap, I'll clean the house, but if she's awake, we try to go outside. This weekend we went swimming. We try to do something. Every night we try to go on a walk around our neighborhood, get outside, fresh air, no masks. Working at Still Hopes, I love the residents here and the staff. It's been a very welcoming place. Sometimes I'm helping with tablets and people with their phones, and sometimes I'm putting in work orders. And a lot of times I'm feeding dogs dogs treats. They come to my desk. There's like 3 or 4 dogs specifically that come to my desk every day, and they want their treat, and that's probably the best part. Some differences between Arkansas and South Carolina would be Arkansas is a lot more small town. Everybody knows everybody, which it's similar in this community, but Still Hopes is kind of like the town that I'm from. It's Guy, Arkansas. It's population like 300-400 people. So the town I was from has the same amount of people as residents and staff here. So it's a lot alike in that aspect. But outside of Still Hopes, it's a lot more city, a lot more interstate. Living in Arkansas, I never had to drive on the interstate to get to work. There was no traffic. So that's all very new. I lived here before, but when I lived here before and I was in high school, I wasn't driving. I didn't start driving until I was in Arkansas. And so driving in a small town, there was never any traffic. My first week living here in South Carolina, I got an accident on the interstate and totaled my vehicle. First accident I've ever been in. So that was a great introduction to Columbia. That's the main difference is traffic. There's a lot more people in stores, out on the road, everywhere there's more people. Not really used to that. Any residents that I haven't met, I would love to meet. So if y'all want to come down to my desk or call me, I can help with tablets. I can give your dog a pet, or your dog a treat.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Our program today is Getting to Know You. It's about social wellness, and we really appreciate you being here with us because it's been a very difficult time to continue social wellness, being together, communicating, living in community. There's no better place to be here than Still Hopes, and we're so glad our new residents and staff are with us. I have a couple of sayings I like to use for this Getting to Know You program. I see strangers acting like friends and friends acting like family. So that's what it's all about here for us at Still Hopes. And then also, referring to friends, there's nothing better than a friend unless it's a friend with chocolate. So to that end, again this month you will have little chocolate goodies in your internal mailboxes this afternoon. Enjoy that. They have been hand packed with love and with sanitized hands and gloved hands. So hope you enjoy and look forward to seeing you next month. Bye-bye.